Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating academic analysis of an ancient civilization on the Iranian plateau. We're going to look at exactly how they encoded a highly advanced understanding of thermodynamics and cosmic order. They essentially built a scientific time capsule engineered specifically to survive centuries of imperial erasure. This is a story of empirical hard science disguised as culture, and honestly, it is absolutely brilliant.
So think about this. It begs a massive mystery box question. How exactly do you preserve a civilization's empirical science when its physical libraries are literally incinerated by conquerors? And when its history is completely rewritten by new empires? When standard dictionaries and mainstream institutions are actively trying to overwrite your ancient terminology to fit orthodox linguistic models, how does the truth actually survive? Well, the answer lies in one of the most ingenious acts of data preservation in human history.
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The prehistoric roots of physics. 2. Ferdowsi's poetic architecture. 3. Scholarly preservation and chronicles. And 4. Independent parallel discovery. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Prehistoric Roots of Physics, looking at the empirical baseline of the Iranian plateau.
To really grasp their science, we have to talk about the term Amesha-Sepanta. Later historians, and definitely subsequent theologies, almost always painted these as abstract angelic deities, but the source material reveals they actually originated as a rigorous scientific taxonomy. The Amesha-Sepanta literally quantified physical existence. We're talking about structural integrity, material resources, thermodynamic energy like heat and fire, fluid dynamics, and biological growth. This was a framework rooted entirely in the physical principles of energy conservation, way before dogmatic theology took over.
Standard history often brushes this ancient civilization's worldview off as just a religious framework based on blind faith and fatalistic mythology. But the source material argues something radically different. This was an empirical science tracking energy shifts, entropy, and immutable physical laws. These early observers realized that the universe operates on a continuous dynamic interplay between low-entropy systemic order and high-entropy chaotic decay.
You've definitely heard of these three famous maxims: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Culturally, they're mostly treated today as simple moral platitudes. But within this prehistoric scientific framework, they were actually operationalized as an empirical deductive method. They were specifically designed to ensure human behavior remained strictly aligned with natural law and systemic equilibrium. It was a methodology for reason and survival, not just being good for the sake of it.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, Ferdowsi's poetic architecture, and how they hid science right inside epic verse.
But wait, how did this knowledge survive long enough to even reach him? When physical texts and archives were destroyed by conquests, the data lived on through the Sini, the sacred chest-to-chest oral memory of the Iranian plateau. You can burn a library to the ground, but you can't easily erase a human chain of memory. This unbroken oral tradition anchored the empirical worldview of the Zend-Avesta across millennia, and that ultimately fed its core thermodynamic truths straight into Ferdowsi's hands. Now, tasked with preserving Iranian history under an Islamic framework right after the Arab-Islamic conquests, Ferdowsi was walking a razor's edge. He couldn't just write a physics textbook. The censors would have destroyed it instantly. So he built a poetic tapestry, the Shahnameh. While the epic surface tells these incredibly dramatic stories of the rise and fall of kings, Ferdowsi was actively encrypting physical laws. He wrote about Zamaneh, the relentless thermodynamic reality of time. He encoded the Sipher, the celestial wheel's immutable rotation. He literally mapped out the entropic decay of high-order structures, showing that matching human ego against the cosmos always triggers an automated systemic correction.
Ferdowsi's own words explicitly reject the idea of static permanence. He writes, "The world from end to end is wisdom and a lesson. The world has no single rotation or fixed will." He's teaching continuous, unyielding energy transformation. He's masterfully masking the scientific laws of systemic change, right behind the tragic, beautiful verse of fallen empires.
Which brings us to Section 3, Scholarly Preservation and Chronicles. We're opening up the technical vaults.
What we see here is an unbroken chronological chain of data. You start way back in the prehistoric era, where the Zend-Avesta anchors the foundational science. Moving into the pre-Islamic era, the Code-e-Nama, or Book of Kings, documents historical memory. Fast forward to the 9th century, the Pahlavi Dink card explicitly traces all primordial sciences right back to Ahuramazdan origins. And finally, by the 11th century, scholars like Al-Biruni are cataloging the ancient computational systems. It is basically an incredible relay race of technical data across thousands of years.
Speaking of Al-Biruni, this 11th century polymath didn't approach astrology as just some mystical court prediction. He approached it as a rigorous, empirical, and historical discipline. Acting almost like a historical detective to ensure the mathematical architecture of the Iranian plateau wasn't lost forever, Al-Biruni actively tracked down surviving Zoroastrian mabeds. He meticulously consulted ancient Middle Persian astronomical tables, permanently recording Sassanid data so future generations would have it. And, he wasn't doing this alone. The Sassanid emperors before him ran massive global administrative efforts to recollect their dispersed scientific texts, pulling data all the way from Byzantium, India, and China. Later on, in Baghdad, astrologers like Abu Mashar integrated this incredibly sophisticated Sassanid cyclical history into much broader planetary theories. These medieval scholars effectively acted as a technical vault, integrating a unified pre-Islamic scientific framework right into the wider network of the medieval world. Let's shift to Section 4, Independent Parallel Discovery and the European Scientific Revolution.
When you put these two historical lineages side by side, it's pretty mind-blowing. During the scientific revolution, European figures like Isaac Newton formulated their mechanics and calculus completely independently. They didn't read ancient Persian texts, they didn't rely on inherited oral memory, or study the Sassanid Z's, those ancient astronomical tables. They arrived at the exact same physical laws through their own direct observation of nature in a totally new era.
The source material draws a really powerful conclusion from this. True physical science is not bound to a single geography or a single lineage of texts. Because the universe operates on immutable laws, like energy conservation and entropy, any civilization that successfully strips away religious fiction and just observes nature objectively will inevitably discover these universal realities. It's a great reminder that true science doesn't belong to one culture, it belongs to the cosmos.
So comparing these trajectories highlights something crucial. The distinct advantage of the ancient Iranian plateau wasn't magic. They just had a massive head start. They achieved an empirical baseline of energy conservation and entropy millennia earlier than the rest of the world. They mapped out this thermodynamic reality and encoded it directly into their cosmology, thousands of years before European thinkers would formalize it with calculus.
Bringing this all together, we really need to look at the historical record with fresh eyes. These texts have a dual nature. On the surface, books like the Shahnameh are magnificent guardians of language and cultural heritage. But beneath the surface, they are highly engineered architectural vessels. They are literal vaults preserving a thermodynamic worldview, designed specifically to smuggle empirical physics right past the noses of ideological censors.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. If the fundamental laws of thermodynamics and energy conservation were successfully hidden inside ancient epic poetry and tribal oral traditions for centuries, what other foundational scientific truths might still be disguised as simple mythology across the world, just sitting there, waiting to be decoded? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me. Keep questioning the surface, and I'll see you in the next explainer.